Good morning. I'm here at the Hill of Tara where I've just been into the old bookshop. One of my favourite places in all of the world, and a place where I can't resist going into every time I'm here. And of course, when I go in there, I usually end up spending some money. However, it is a treasure trove of Irish mythology and history and poetry, and it's got new and second-hand books and some very valuable works, in my opinion. So I picked up this morning a first edition copy of Eleanor Hull's translation of the story of Cuchulainn, the Hound of Ulster. Now this is beautifully bound and published with colour illustrations, and the book was actually published in 1909. So I just wanted to very quickly draw your attention to the section that deals with the death of the Sons of Usna. So if you have read my book Mythical Ireland, you might be aware of the fact that there's a section of this story that I speak about in relation to the Milky Way, because it's supposed to be a creation myth in relation to how the Milky Way was created. So I'm just going to read a little bit and then just give you a very brief explanation. And this is where the Sons of Usna had been killed and their grave was being dug. They had dug the pit for three only, and they lowered the bodies of the three heroes into the grave side by side. But when Deirdre saw that, she called aloud to the Sons of Usna to make space for her between them, for she was following them. The body of Ainle, that was at Nashi's right hand, moved a little apart, and a space was made for Deirdre close at Nashi's side, where she was wont to be, and Deirdre leapt into the tomb, and placed her arm around the neck of Nashi, her own love, and she kissed him, and her heart broke within her, and she died. And together in the one tomb the three sons of Usna and Deirdre were buried, and all the men of Ulster who stood by wept aloud. But Conor was angry, and he ordered the bodies to be uncovered again, and the body of Deirdre to be removed, so that even in death she might not be with Nashi. See, Conor, who was the king, had basically kept Deirdre imprisoned from when she was a young girl, because he wanted to marry her when she was old enough, but she fell in love with the young warrior Nashi. And he caused Deirdre to be buried on one side of the loch, and Nashi on the other side of the loch, and the graves were closed. Then a young pine tree grew from the grave of Deirdre, and a young pine from the grave of Nashi, and their branches grew towards each other, until they entwined one with the other across the loch. And Conor would have cut them down, but the men of Ulster would not allow this, and they set a watch and protected the trees until King Conor died. Now this story pertains to apparently how the Milky Way was formed, the twining branches. So if you look at the Milky Way from Cygnus down towards that gap, as it were, where between Sagittarius and Scorpius, where the sun is located currently in this epoch at winter solstice, you'll see that there's what we call the dark rift. There's a dark rift. The river of the Milky Way, as it were, appears to split into two. And apparently, according to Irish emigrants who went to Canada, this is a creation myth that tells about how the Milky Way was formed, that the twining branches that grew out of Deirdre and Nashi's graves entwined together above the lake on the opposite sides of which they were buried, and that this is how the Milky Way was formed. So it's a fascinating insight into Irish cosmology, because there's very, very little direct explanation, as it were, of what the myths mean. And there's one sort of isolated example. I deal in that section of the Mythical Ireland book with, I think, a total of 7 different Irish names and customs around the Milky Way. So it's very interesting. And so if you want to get yourself a copy of Mythical Ireland, visit my website, mythicalireland.com, and go to the shop, and you can buy a signed copy online there. Unfortunately, first edition copies of Eleanor Hull's Cuchulainn are much rarer and a little bit more expensive than my own book.